Everything looks expensive now. And that's not inflation by accident. Markets are up, assets are soaring, headlines say the economy is resilient, but resilience for who? This system isn't broken. It's optimized. Optimized to reward ownership. Optimized to punish dependence on wages. Optimized to look healthy while quietly extracting value from below. You're told growth is strong, but what's really growing is distance between assets and labor, between policy and people, between effort and reward. This economy doesn't lift everyone. It sorts them. Those who own win faster. Those who work fall behind quietly, not because they failed, but because the rules changed without their consent. If this feels less like opportunity and more like a rigged game, you're not imagining it. Stay with me, because to understand where this imbalance came from, we first have to expose the system that made inequality look like success. What you're experiencing isn't a phase, it's a structure. Modern economies are judged by averages, GDP, markets, consumption. But averages hide distribution, and distribution tells the real story. Growth didn't disappear. It concentrated. At the top, spending explodes. At the bottom, it stalls. In the middle, anxiety replaces stability. When headlines talk about a strong consumer, they're not talking about most people. They're talking about a minority carrying the numbers for everyone else. This creates a distortion. Policy responds to the data. The data reflects the wealthy. So policy follows wealth. The system begins mistaking elite behavior for national health. And slowly, quietly, half the population becomes invisible to the metrics that decide everything. That's how inequality stops being a social issue and becomes a design feature. But this didn't start with people, it started with assets, with who owns them, and who never had the chance to see how the gap became permanent. We have to look at where money actually flows first. Money doesn't move evenly, it never has, it enters through the top. Banks first, corporations next, asset owners immediately. By the time it reaches wages, prices have already moved. This is the hidden engine of inequality, not corruption, transmission. When new money is created, it doesn't lift incomes. It inflates assets. Stocks rise, housing surges. Debt gets cheaper for those who already have it. If you don't own assets, you don't feel the stimulus. You feel the inflation. That's why paychecks lag, why rent jumps faster than wages, why effort feels disconnected from progress. This isn't a glitch. It's a feature of how modern money works. The system rewards proximity to capital, not contribution, not labor. And once asset inflation becomes the primary growth engine, inequality locks in. Because ownership compounds while wages chase prices. But asset inflation alone doesn't extract enough to fully monetize imbalance. The system needed something else, something automated, something invisible. That's where technology enters the story. What technology changed wasn't speed, it was coordination. Algorithms don't compete, they synchronize. In housing, that changed everything. Pricing software learned the market, vacancies, demand, behavior. Then it learned how to hold the line. Lowering rents stopped being rational, even when units sat empty, especially when they did, because the goal wasn't occupancy, it was extraction. When prices rise together, no one undercuts, no one breaks ranks, rent climbs without improvement, without investment, without negotiation. You feel it as the market. But it's not a market anymore. It's automation enforcing scarcity. This isn't innovation creating value. It's code preserving leverage. And once housing becomes an algorithmic asset, costs stop responding to people. They respond to optimization. That pressure doesn't stay with renters alone. It moves upward into mortgages, into mobility, into the middle class, which is where the next trap closes, not through poverty, but through stability that can't move. Stability can become a cage. Millions of households are locked in place. Low-rate mortgages, cheap debt secured years ago. It looks like safety. It feels like security, but it removes movement. Selling means higher payments. Moving means smaller homes. Opportunity comes with penalties. So people stay, even when jobs change, even when cities decline, even when better options exist elsewhere. This freezes the housing market, reduces supply, pushes prices higher for everyone else. The middle class becomes liquid in theory, but immobile in practice. Not poor enough to qualify for help, not wealthy enough to absorb shocks. Every decision carries risk. Every downturn feels existential. This is how a society hollows out its center, not through collapse, through paralysis. And when the middle stops moving, power concentrates even faster at the top, because those who can move capital freely inherit flexibility. Which brings us to the final layer of the system, the one designed to ensure that concentration never reverses. At the very top, the rules change completely. This is where wealth stops being taxed and starts being protected. Assets are bought, not sold. Loans are taken, not income earned. Cash appears without taxes. Control remains intact. This is how fortunes grow without ever passing through the system that governs everyone else. Buy, borrow, never liquidate. And when life ends, the slate is wiped clean. No back taxes, no reckoning, just inheritance reset to zero. This isn't loopholes. It's architecture. A legal framework designed to let wealth compound without friction. While wages are taxed immediately, while consumption is penalized, while labor pays every step of the way. This is how inequality becomes permanent. Not because the rich cheat, but because the system invites them not to play. And once wealth escapes taxation, it escapes democracy too, because power follows money, and money that can't be touched can't be challenged, which is how economics quietly becomes politics, and why the next break is no longer financial. It's institutional. When wealth stops circulating, politics stops responding. Elections still happen. Debates still air, but outcomes stop changing, because policy no longer follows voters. It follows donors, lobbyists, capital that never sleeps. This is political capture, not corruption in the shadows, alignment in plain sight. When laws are written, they protect what funds them. When regulations are weakened, it's called efficiency. Productivity rises. Pay doesn't. The gap widens quietly year after year until frustration replaces faith. People vote. Nothing moves. And when democracy stops delivering, it doesn't collapse immediately. It decays. Trust erodes. Institutions hollow. Extremes grow louder. This is the cost of an economy that concentrates power faster than it distributes prosperity. Because once citizens believe the system no longer listens, they stop participating. And that's when instability becomes structural, which brings us to the final horizon. Not a forecast, a pressure test. The moment when all of this meets reality at once. What happens next isn't a mystery, it's a convergence. Debt meets inequality, asset inflation meets social strain. Institutions meet the limits of credibility. The system doesn't break at the top. It breaks where resilience is gone. When prices rise faster than wages, when mobility freezes, when trust runs out before money does. That's the danger ahead. Not a single crash, but multiple stresses arriving together. An economy that can't stimulate anymore, a middle class that can't move, a lower half that can't absorb shock. This is how corrections turn systemic, because there's no buffer left, no shared belief, no margin for error. The question for what comes next is not whether growth returns, it's whether legitimacy does, whether people still believe the rules apply evenly. That effort matters, that the future is open. If this helped you see the system more clearly, don't let it stay abstract. Share it, talk about it, question it, because awareness is the last defense before pressure becomes collapse. And what comes after this won't be decided by markets alone, It will be decided by whether people still accept the system they're asked to hold together.